So you've no doubt heard about the Epstein Files, a massive document release, a web of global power, and a story that feels like it's far from over. Today, we're going to dig into what this flood of information actually tells us about power, transparency, and a system that, in many ways, completely failed.
Let's start with the number that kicked this all off, 3.5 million. Following the Epstein Files Transparency Act, the Department of Justice released nearly 3.5 million pages of records. And just to be super clear here, this wasn't some kind of leak. This was an official, legally mandated disclosure. But, the reaction wasn't exactly a round of applause for transparency. It was suspicion. Lawmakers and watchdogs almost immediately started using this phrase, obfuscation by scale. The accusation was that the DOJ wasn't trying to reveal the truth, but actually bury it by deliberately drowning everyone in so much data that finding anything truly meaningful would be next to impossible.
So, what was actually in this flood of files? Well, the stated goal was transparency, but what we got was something a whole lot more complex and honestly, in many ways, far more disturbing. And this is absolutely crucial to understand. This wasn't just a simple case file like you'd see on a crime show. It was this massive administrative archive. Think of it as documenting decades of back and forth between Epstein and major institutions. Law enforcement, prosecutors, you name it. It painted this incredibly detailed picture of exactly how he was allowed to operate inside the system for so long.
Now, before we even get to the famous names that grabbed all the headlines, we have to talk about the immediate and just devastating human cost of this release, and the fact that it fell hardest on the very people it was supposed to be helping.
And look, this wasn't some jab from a political rival. This was the assessment from victim advocates themselves. Because for all the DOJ's assurances, the redaction process, well, it failed. It failed on a catastrophic scale, which led to this absolutely searing condemnation. In the very first batch of documents that went public, the personal identifying information of at least 31 people who were victimized as children, was just out there. We're talking full names, contact info, even financial records, released for the whole world to see.
And this right here just starkly illustrates the central, tragic irony of this whole thing. You have this well-intentioned push for public transparency that ends up re-traumatizing survivors, shattering their trust in the justice system. And it makes you ask a really tough question. Who is this release really for?
Okay, now let's get to the part that, let's be honest, completely dominated the news cycle. The names. Because when you look at these files, it's like a who's who of global power brokers, and seeing them all together paints a really disturbing picture of the kind of access Epstein had. I mean, the sheer range of these names is staggering, right? You've got politics, tech, royalty, business. But it is so critical to understand the DOJ's warning here. Just because a name appears in these files, that does not on its own imply any wrongdoing at all. A lot of these mentions are totally incidental or they're just unverified claims made by other people. And the files reveal that this wasn't just about being a social climber. No, this was a calculated strategy. By constantly surrounding himself with presidents and ministers and billionaires, Epstein built this powerful shield of what you could call perceived legitimacy. The unspoken assumption was always, well, someone this connected must be okay, right? It was probably his greatest defense.
But if you look past the big names and the social strategy, the files reveal what might be the biggest systemic failure of all. The story of the powerful federal case against Epstein that was all ready to go and then was just abandoned. This timeline, it's just chillin' when you lay it all out like this. In 2007, federal investigators had a huge indictment ready, accusing him of trafficking 19 girls. But instead, a non-prosecution agreement was cut. He ends up serving just 13 months in a state prison, and then he just re-enters the exact same elite circles. The files really force us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. How much could have been prevented if the system had just followed through?
So, how did he do it, right? How did he build this incredible shield of legitimacy? Well, the files give us a direct look into his mindset, and it's all thanks to a final extensive interview he gave right before his death.
In that interview, he was asked this question point blank. And his answer pretty much reveals the entire playbook for how he manipulated some of the most powerful people on the planet.
This was his core belief. This was his whole worldview, right here. He saw the world's leaders as basically ignorant when it came to money. In his mind, they just didn't get how banking or the global financial system actually worked. And he saw that knowledge gap not as a problem, but as a vulnerability, one he could personally exploit. He'd use these complex-sounding concepts like fractionalized banking, this idea that banks can lend out way more money than they actually have in their vaults, to position himself as some kind of financial genius. By explaining these so-called secrets of the system, he made himself seem indispensable to powerful people who suddenly felt like they were out of their depth.
Which brings us to the final, and, let's be honest, probably the most frustrating chapter of this whole story. We have a mountain of new information, a much clearer picture of his methods and his network, and it has all been met with an official wall of inaction.
And this is the fundamental disconnect at the heart of it all. On one side, you have the Department of Justice basically saying, hey, we followed the law, our review is over. But on the other side, you've got the public and the victims, for whom just releasing a bunch of files is not even remotely the same thing as achieving justice.
This quote just captures the public mood perfectly. After the DOJ announced that no new criminal charges were likely to come from these files, that feeling of an unresolved story just got stronger. We have more revelation than we have ever had before, but absolutely no more consequence. And so, we're all left with this question. It's really the central question of the Epstein files. We have this deeply unsettling look into the mechanics of power and influence. But when 3.5 million pages of evidence lead to nothing, you have to ask, what does accountability even look like? The ultimate question of justice is just left hanging in the air.